Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Jonas Tech Vlog. Let's talk about Google Pixel 4a, a worthy Android alternative to the iPhone SE. So, let's get started. Sometimes downsizing is a good thing. Just look at the Google Pixel 4a. Last year, Pixel 4 was fine enough Android phone in its own right, but Google never did enough to justify the $799 starting price. It didn't necessarily wow me with some of its flashy new features like motion sense gesture controls, and the battery life was deeply mediocre for a flagship phone. While Google may not always be able to compete with the most expensive heavy hitters in the market, its budget handsets are a different story. Cheaper, leaner Pixel 4a is finally here, nearly a year after Pixel 4's launch, and like the Pixel 3a before its budget-minded buyers will find out a lot to like. If you can deal without some features, the Pixel 4a is a nice Android competitor for the iPhone SE. What's good in it? A bigger battery, smaller bezel, almost the same camera. Before we get to how the Pixel 4a is different on that inside, let's talk about the small physical changes on the outside. For the starters, the Pixel 4a is made with cheaper plastic than last year's flagship, which makes it feel less expensive. That said, at 143 grams is almost 20 grams lighter than the Pixel 4. It's also vertically a bit shorter, so reaching across the screen with one hand is slightly easier than before. The 5.8-inch display is a tenth of an inch bigger than the Pixel 4, but the size difference feels a bit more pronounced due to significantly smaller bezel around the screen. Google specifically cut out the more prominent top bezel that previously housed the selfie cam and the motion sensor technology in favor of a hole punch camera in the upper left corner. I don't personally mind the lack of motion sense in the Pixel 4a. Waving my hands above the Pixel 4 rarely worked properly for me anyway. But for those who would find it legitimately useful for things like silencing alarms or skipping songs, understand that it's not on the 4a. Last noticeable alteration is a fingerprint sensor on the back in the top middle portion of the phone. Pixel 4 didn't read fingerprints at all, opting instead for face unlock. I'll beam on the lack of face unlock later, but I'll say that as someone who generally has trouble with biometrics, the Pixel 4's fingerprint sensor consistently worked well for me. By the way, the Pixel 4a has a headphone jack on the top. The iPhone SE doesn't have one. You also get 128GB of storage in the 4a, which is twice as much as the default iPhone SE offers for $50 more. Gone is the cutting edge Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 processor that powered the Pixel 4, as Google opted for less powered and presumably cheaper Snapdragon 730G processor this time. I was worried the 4a would feel slower than its snappy big brother, but I'm happy to report that not really the case. It never got bogged down by basic daily tasks like ID browsing social media when you are supposed to be working, streaming high definition videos, or even watching live sports. This powerful processor might also contribute to what is probably the best change Google made, the battery. Last year's flagship model had a paltry 2800 mAh engine inside, while the 4a bumps up 1140 mAh. In less technical terms, I was able to get somewhere between 8 and 10 hours of frequent social media and YouTube use before I felt the need to plug into the USB Type-C charger. Doesn't necessarily qualify as all-day battery life, but it's also a $350 phone. It's tough to ask for much more than you get from a Pixel 4a's battery. Same goes for the Pixel 4a's camera. Google cut the 16 megapixel telephoto zoom lens that was on the back of the Pixel 4 but kept the 12 megapixel rear lens and 8 megapixel front lens. Google's computational photography tech works as well as ever, with the night slide still illuminating photos taken in darkness with something that sort of looks like movie set lighting. Live HDR Plus is back too, so you can still adjust exposure before snapping HDR photos like before. In practice, the Pixel 4a's camera is almost identical to Pixel 4, losing the second lens with mostly impact your ability to take deep optical zoom shots. That's a fair compromise for a $350 phone that can still use night slide, live HDR Plus and Google's portrait mode. So, What's bad in it? No face unlock or 90Hz support. 5G is coming later. Remember that the fingerprint sensor we talked about earlier? The one that works even for me, a person whose fingerprints are so unreadable that he should consider a side gig as a cat burglar. That's all fine and good, but it comes at the expense of a face unlock. This isn't a massive deal-breaking exclusion by any means. I don't love the placement of the fingerprint sensor. It's only mildly awkward to place your index finger there to unlock the Pixel 4a. It was faster and more futuristic to use my face on the Pixel 4. On the plus side, Pixel's pre-existing smart unlock feature that turns off the locks on your phone if you are at home, which it senses using location data. That means if you are stuck at home during quarantine, you don't have to use the fingerprint sensor at all the time. The most concerning cut feature involves the display. The Pixel 4 supported a 90Hz refresh rate that made everything from web browsing to watching high frame rate videos look smooth as silk. Google downgraded the 4a to a 60Hz OLED screen. It's more than adequate. Apple still hasn't made a phone with a higher refresh rate than 60Hz. It would have been nice to have a 90Hz option. If OnePlus can fit that into a sub $500 phone with a Nord, Google should be able to as well. Lastly, there's one potential reason to hold off a Pixel 4a right now: 5G. Google promised with the 4a was unveiled that a 5G version would be available later this year for a $500. That's a kind of steep price increase for a 5G alone, assuming there are no other changes to that version of the phone. But if access to 5G networks in a budget phone is important to you, it's little disappointing that isn't available right away. So, the final verdict: didn't revamp the Pixel 4 with a bunch of snazzy new features or a radical redesign. Instead, the Pixel 4a is probably what Pixel 4 shouldn't have been all along: a mid-range phone rather than an underpowered and overpriced flagship. Even with the weak processor, the Pixel 4a handles daily smartphone activities without any major performance hitches. Google took out the impressive optical zoom of the Pixel 4, but otherwise the camera is the same as it was on the most expensive model. And to top it all, the battery is actually improved from the more expensive model. Sure, there's a couple of minor flaws if you look at the hard enough. Have been nice to have a model with the same 90Hz refresh rate as the Pixel 4, for example. Additionally, the lack of face unlock and the lack of 5G are bummers. None of those are bad enough to stop the Pixel 4a from being a heck of value even compared to the excellent iPhone SE. Google Pixel 4a smartphone price in India is 26,290. It has a 6GB RAM and 128GB of internal storage. As for the color options, the Google Pixel 4a smartphone comes in black color. Hope you guys like this video and find it informative. Comment down below what you think about the Google Pixel 4a smartphone, a worthy Android alternative to the iPhone SE. Like and share this video, and if you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please subscribe to Jonas Tech Blog and motivate me to do more videos in future. That's all for now guys. See you guys on my next video. Until then, goodbye.